All right, folks, I think we can get started. Apologize for the delay. Thanks for staying the extra 30 minutes. We'll make this session exciting and interactive. I'm Rishi Vesh. I'm the VP of Product at RightScale. I have Ryan Gaia, who's a Cloud Solutions Engineer at RightScale. We're here to talk about how you can enable your businesses with self-service in the cloud and become an IT hero. Now, obviously, to become a hero, it means that there's some challenges that you're going to have to overcome. Otherwise, you don't get to wear that hero badge. This is kind of what your lines of business expect today. Very simple, on-demand services that they can instantly get access to. And before I dig into some of the challenges that some of you folks want to solve, I want to get a sense for the audience in the room today. How many folks actually run a workload on Amazon currently in production, dev test? Okay, so good, most of you folks. How many also have maybe a private data center where they're running servers? Oh, good, so you folks are all well aware of the kind of hybrid challenge. So that's good to know. We can definitely focus on that in the conversation. The other sense I want to get is just how technical the audience is today. Because I'm going to do a lot of talking. Ryan here is going to do a lot of demoing, and maybe we can tweak the level to which we go depending on how many folks are technical. How many actually write code today in production? Oh, cool. So we've got a good mix of people. Sorry, what was that? Oh, well, I should say I'm not just hobbyists in terms of being programmers.
So what I hear you asking or saying is that I don't test my code, but when I do it in production. Is that the, yeah, I got it.
There you go. That's cool. So, I'd say business has a very short span of attention. They wanted things yesterday. They have access to a vast array of technology that they can, literally at their fingertips. I mean, you folks all have, mobile phones and whatnot. IT has kind of gotten consumerized, and that attention span of that business user, is very, very short. Now, as you try to provide these simple services to users, you as IT folks have to solve a variety of challenges as you provide and make these services available to your end customers. Things like governance. You've made these services available, some in the public cloud, as you folks are doing, some in your private environments. How do you govern it? How do you control it? How do you make sure that you're providing the right level of SLA for that service? How do you standardize your workload? And how do you make sure that this workload is repeatable, regardless of what environment you want to set this workload up in? Those are some of the challenges that you're going to have to overcome as you try to provide this simple veneer to your end customers, who are your lines of businesses. Well, for one, you have an awesome tool at your disposal in the form of the AWS cloud. It's a vast pool of computing resources. It's available over the internet. It's available on demand. You can scale up and you can scale down capacity. You can pay for what you use. There's a variety of sophistication in terms of different instance sizes that you can use. There's also sophistication in terms of the pricing models. You can choose to buy reserved instances. So that's gives you a lot of flexibility in this public cloud environment. And not just flexibility from a workload point of view, or from a pricing point of view. You can also go global. There's a variety of data centers that exist globally where you can provision resources and enable your lines of business. So you do have one sort of excellent tool to start with. But even as you start to, and by the way, we as RightScale have been kind of in this cloud management space since the beginning of cloud. We started just about the same time that Amazon launched AWS, and we've sort of been helping customers in the cloud for about 7 years. We have about 70,000 users of ours, and we've provisioned through our service about 6 million servers. And I was trying to do the math in terms of if you actually thought about 6 million servers, how big would that be? And it'll definitely fill up this room. It'll probably fill up a few rooms like this. And so that's the level of scale that we've achieved through the cloud for some of our customers. And even individual application deployments, we've scaled up and down across hybrid environments in the 10,000 plus server range. So really a sort of massive scale of operation in the cloud. And we're actually going from what I would call cloud management to cloud portfolio management. So it isn't just one sort of asset that you have to manage. You have, as a lot of you raise your hands, on-premise assets as well that you're trying to manage, and you want that sort of single pane of glass across all of them. And so we've done workloads at massive scale in this hybrid environment. And the other interesting thing is we've done this for a variety of different industries. So some of you might see echoes of your own industries here, whether it's healthcare, highly regulated type of industries, whether it's e-commerce kind of consumer retail websites where the loads spiky. We've got tons of use cases there. And we'll dig into a couple that have actually set up self-service portals as part of this conversation. But this is just to paint the picture that we've done this not just at scale for a long amount of time. We've done it across a bunch of industries. So that's really good experience that we have under our belt. Now, as you try to sort of take on this challenge of self-service, and we had that the sort of tip of the iceberg and the bottom of the iceberg with a lot of terms there, I've kind of bucketed your challenges into these few categories. One is sort of maintaining consistency as you're operating in this hybrid environment, public cloud as well as your on-premise data center. How do you maintain consistency? How do you maintain repeatability as you fire up workloads and you tear them down? How do you govern kind of across this disparate environment? That's another challenge that your businesses, they don't care about the fact that you have to solve it, but you have to solve it as IT professionals. The next dimension is managing costs, and there's a change in the way that you do that now that you have cloud as well as your on-premise IT resources. And the last one is an odd one. That's what sets up the motivation for self-service in the first place. It's almost a paradox of choice, and we'll talk about that a little bit, what that means. Choice is good. Too much choice can sometimes be a challenge that you've got to overcome. Talk about the first one a little bit in terms of consistency. What the picture is indicating, it's a hotel room. A hotel is a shared resource, much like the cloud is a shared pool of resource. And maintaining consistency and reliability of your applications that your businesses provision is one of the challenges that you folks have to solve as IT professionals. An example here, a few years ago, I was setting up an early cloud deployment. And we had a couple of hundred servers that were running in the cloud. And my chief architect came up to me and said, Rishi, I've figured out that in the cluster we're operating, the probability of failure is close to 1. And I was like, man, that sounds really smart, but can you translate that into English for me? He said, basically, failure is guaranteed. One of these nodes is bound to go down. Now, as a guy who's running the shop, I'm like, well, that kind of makes me a little uncomfortable. But the point is, as you're dealing with these cloud environments where there may be a little bit of inconsistency, you have to solve that challenge by automation and instrumentation and sort of dealing with this sort of unreliability that might exist in a vast pool of shared resources. A variety of things that you can do to do that. I'll dig into some solutions in the end, but that's one of the challenges that your businesses are going to expect that you've solved for them as you take advantage of these cool cloud capabilities that you have in front of you. The next one is repeatability. And again, as you're trying to set up development environments, testing environments, staging environments, you want to make sure that each time you set these things up, they're the same. If you go and try to do this manually, and your development and your testing and your production environment are different, it's not going to be good when your applications actually go live and you're trying to run production quality, highly available workloads on them. When you try to fix problems, it becomes a very challenging aspect to go deal with them. So trying to make your workloads repeatable, whether it's development and test, whether it's HA and DR, that's another great scenario. You want to make sure that whatever you've got in your remote disaster recovery site is an exact clone of what you have in your production environment. So that's another thing that you've got to solve for your business users. The next one is governance. And there's two dimensions to governance. One is just securing your assets in the cloud. So that's making sure that you've locked down access to the resources. Only the right people can access the pools of resources that you want them to have access to. Some of it may be available over the public internet. You might need to go, set up a VPC. Maybe you set up Direct Connect to solve some of your hybrid IT challenges. So securing your cloud is sort of one aspect of governance that's really important. The other aspect, are there anybody in the room that works in a regulated industry where compliance may be a problem or audit may be a problem? So there's always this challenge of, okay, who did what when? I may be operating, tens of thousands of servers, but I need to go back in time and take a look at, what happened on day X because, something went wrong and you're trying to diagnose an issue. Maybe you've got a compliance audit coming up, and you've got to demonstrate that you understand all of the changes that went on in your environment. So those are some of the challenges that you've got to solve from a governance point of view. And as you use the cloud, your business users are going to expect that you solve these problems for them. But that's certainly something that is important for you to understand. The other dimension is cost management. And cost management is a bit different when it comes to cloud versus some of the more traditional on-premise environments. It's almost like when you were setting up your data center in the past, you were sort of taking on a capital budget in the beginning and trying to project your usage over time, but your cash outlay was immediate. In the cloud, it's different. You sort of get to grow or shrink your costs as you scale up or scale down your cloud resources. And that cost management really becomes an interesting challenge for you. There's a variety of different price points that even AWS has for the variety of instances. You can buy reserved instances to optimize your costs. So managing costs becomes a pretty decent challenge in this environment. Then the other thing your business is going to expect is if you've got maybe you're supporting 2 or 3 different lines of businesses, people only want to get charged for what they used. So that's an important aspect for you to consider. How do you charge back to your different lines of businesses for their own utilization that they've done in the cloud? So chargeback becomes an important consideration for you. There's another element before chargeback, which is showing people what something might cost in a cloud environment. So an example would be, one of your development teams wants to go provision 50 servers to run for a new project. They'd like to know kind of upfront how much this is expected to cost them on a monthly basis, so they're not surprised by some really heavy overage cost at the end of that time. So managing costs is something that you're going to be expected to do, which is very different from the way you did it in the past, where it was a capital outlay in the beginning. This is much more variable. And you're also kind of expected, as you go have a conversation maybe with your CIO, to go project what this cost would be in the future, because you don't have your capital outlay now. But people are going to ask you, okay, I get the fact that we're spending only so much today, but as my traffic grows, what is this going to look like next week, next month, next year? What's it going to look like as I have traffic spikes coming in? So cost management is a huge challenge that you're going to be expected to solve. And then I love this slide because it sort of illustrates that paradox of choice. You go to a drive-through, maybe you don't quite know what you want. You come up with a big menu like this. It's really hard to pick and choose exactly what you want. It's almost like you want a curated list of things that meet your needs and certainly what your lines of business will expect. I've walked into restaurants before with a huge, complicated menu, and I wind up ordering just the things that I know. That may not be the most optimal choice. It may not be the best choice. So that's something that where you can help your businesses kind of curate out of this vast array of cloud resources exactly the ones that are most relevant to the problems that they're trying to solve. There's another dimension to this choice as well. Sometimes you might make the wrong suboptimal choice. Sometimes it just leads to wastage. So you may have fired up a bunch of these instances in a cloud or maybe in your own on-premise environment, and they're not being used at all. And that's, if it's in the cloud, it's actually wasting you money because you're being charged for them over the course of time. Every time you leave the lights on, you're getting billed for electricity. Kind of a similar deal with the cloud. So this notion of curating choice and giving people a more narrow list and guiding them down a path is something that you can do to help your lines of business. So let's take a look at a couple of customers of ours that actually took on these challenges and solved them. The first one I want to get into is Eli Lilly. So they're obviously in the sort of pharmaceutical business, and they had these insanely long provisioning times when some of their teams needed resources to set up new projects. In fact, it's 3,600 minutes. I was trying to translate that down. It's actually about a month. So if a development team, a research team of theirs wanted to provision something new, it took them a month before they could do this. And then again, it was making a lot of requests to IT, asking for a lot of help, lots of manual work in order to provision these workloads, error-prone. Maybe the first time it happened, the workload wasn't quite right, wasn't provisioned correctly, so redoing that work. Just lots of errors and lots of time spent. So we actually helped them set up a self-service portal that had curated workloads that their lines of business wanted. You could even see what this would cost you if you provisioned it. This was done, again, in a hybrid environment. Some of it in the AWS cloud and some of it in an on-premises environment. And then we were able to reduce that provisioning time for one of their workloads from a month to under 30 minutes. And this allowed them to dramatically change the way some of their research teams actually did work. They were able to take on projects that initially they just wouldn't even be willing to try because the time would be so long. So this is a great example of how you can set up something like this for your businesses and be that hero that makes new things possible. Allow people to fail fast and be more agile in their lines of business. Another example of a customer is Quest Diagnostics. They also had a similar challenge. It's a regulated industry. Not all of their data is allowed to leave their on-premises environment, but they still wanted to leverage the agility of cloud and give users that sense for clicking and provisioning a resource and make it look like it was on demand. So they did something pretty similar. They actually built a user interface, put it up in the cloud, and through using RightScale, were able to dramatically reduce provisioning times, make the process much more repeatable, and then achieve, again, success for their lines of business. So these are just a couple of examples of customers. As I pointed out, we've solved challenges like this for a variety of industries, for a variety of different use cases. And now I'm going to dig a little bit into how you can actually solve some of these challenges. The first one, we were talking about consistency and repeatability. A lot of those challenges can be solved through automation. We at RightScale believe that automation is a great way for you to make yourselves extremely efficient as an IT organization, but also solve this problem of dealing with maybe inconsistency in your environments and making highly available systems accessible to your customers. Configuration management is one of the techniques that you use in order to set up a given workload. So let's say you've got a server that you want to set up with a given stack on it. Using a series of configuration management tools, whether it's Chef, whether it's Puppet, whether it's maybe Ansible Salt, allows you to repeatably set up a given server. You have the ability to clone configurations as you're going from development to testing to production. The same level of automation that you use to set up one server can be used to set up an array of servers. It can be used to set up many different environments. We'll dig into that and show you what that looks like in a bit as well. One of the other challenges you've got to deal with is, let's say you've got 500 servers running up there. There's a security patch you need to apply. You're not going to manually go in and update this on all of those servers. You need some kind of a tool that helps you apply that security patch, maybe across some of these arrays of servers you've got running, not just in the public cloud environment, but also in your private data centers. And last but not the least, you need visibility into what's going on an instance so you can decide when you need to scale up and when you need to scale down. So an example would be, maybe you've got 50 app servers running in a cluster somewhere. You've got a spike in workload that comes in. You need the monitoring tools in place to determine when the right time is to scale up and when the right time is to scale down. Then maybe you want to set up a voting sort of a system that says, if more than 50% of my servers are experiencing load, then increase the allocation of servers so that I can handle a peak coming in. Maybe you want to set up a rule that says, after half the servers are experiencing low utilization, bring that utilization down again so that I can reduce my cost in the cloud. So all of these techniques around automation really help you set up your workloads in your cloud environments. I would say automation also helps you a lot in terms of governance. So once you've automated a workload, you know exactly what kinds of versions you've got running in which environment, and that helps you standardize your stacks in a really, really good manner. So I didn't mention it on this slide, but automation also helps you with governance. So we were talking about cost analytics as well. Now, one of the best ways that we found, and this is a tool that Ryan will show you a demo of in a bit, and you can come by a booth and sign up for access to it. One of the best ways we found about getting people good insight into their cost is visualizing it. The first time we set up a tool like this in our environment, we were just amazed at where instances were being consumed that we were not even aware of. We were paying for this consumption, but we weren't aware this was going on because we didn't have the ability to just visualize where it was being used, and then look at all of the spikes, look at the different instance sizes, look at where our dollars were being spent. So just this ability to visualize your costs is something that you need as you try to set up your own IT environments. The next thing I talked about a little bit was forecasting your future spend. That's also extremely important for you to do, to have a sense for understanding when you want to invest in maybe buying reserved instances and reducing your overall cost. And by doing this, you can reduce any form of wastage. One of the things that we found with customers, I was chatting with a few last night, you spin up a development environment, you're being charged for it maybe all night long, but the reality is your developers come in at maybe 8 in the morning, leave at 8 at night, and you can automatically set up rules that turn servers off and turn them on and save your company money. So that's the element of cloud analytics and cost management that we do. The next thing you need to do to solve the governance problem is to get visibility and control. I was talking about access controls. That's really key. Having the ability to segregate users into different pools, having the ability for different users to get access to different sets of resources, that's one of the critical ways that you can isolate kind of one set of users or one business unit from another business unit. And we allow you to do that very easily through the RightScale product. The other point is I was talking about security. And one of the elements of security is network security. So you want to make sure that as you've got your workloads running in the cloud, you don't, for example, you've got the right security group set up, you have the right rules set up so that nobody from the public internet maybe can access your database. So we give you tools to visualize that and detect all of these points that you may have vulnerabilities in. And so segregating your traffic into groups and giving you visibility is one of those key aspects. The next one is this notion of audit history. So going back in time and taking a look at a given server, seeing what happened to that server, making sure that you understand all the changes that went on, and giving you the ability to export that and sort of put it into tools of your choice. And last but not the least, giving you a single pane of glass that lets you monitor not just your public cloud resources, but your sort of private and on-premise resources too. So all of these tools are available to you through the RightScale product and allow you to sort of attain this governance in the cloud, in the sort of hybrid cloud world. Then how do you actually achieve your self-service portal? This is the last slide that I'll leave before I hand it over to Ryan to actually show you a demo of what the capability looks like. But you can see we have a platform that operates across multiple clouds. It can operate in on-premise environments too, as well as connect to AWS cloud environments. We've got an API. That's the one that we've used in order to construct these self-service portals for our customers. So you can use that API across a bunch of these different cloud providers. We've got a user interface that you can use as cloud administrators that administer the whole environment. But then, like I showed Eli Lilly, as well as Quest Diagnostics, you can set up very, very simple self-service portals with this kind of architecture that allow you to provide the self-service capabilities to your users and make a very curated experience for them while you solve the problems of cost control, governance, management, security, and sort of making a reliable sort of infrastructure. So that's kind of where I wanted to stop in terms of the challenges that you have to solve as you build this self-service portal for your end customers and kind of launch it into a demo and just show you what this actually looks like behind the scenes.
Great. Thanks, Rishi. Let me get switched over to my laptop here. So the first thing we want to do is kind of give you a real quick peek at this tool. This is actually something that I built to sort of demonstrate that, right? We've shown the examples of how Eli Lilly and Quest have done this. Of course, we can't show you the products that they built. But I put together this. This is actually open source. You can check this out as well. And it provides all of the same functionality and all of the same agility that Rishi described. It gives you the ability to expose these very simple services to your end users, right? Keep that provisioning time down, bake those best practices in, the things that you need to consider in terms of availability and performance and governance, and we'll get into some of those details here in a bit. So what I'll do, I'll just go ahead and click on one of these, and in this case, it asks quite a lot of questions. We'll give this a name. But really, depending on how you actually choose to implement your self-service solution and consume our API, you can build all sorts of things in here where it assumes a lot of these things, right? Maybe the user's already authenticated, which I happen to be in this case, so you know the cost center that they belong to. You know the group that they work for. Maybe you know a project code that they are currently working on. You can have them choose that from a drop-down, right? You can kind of pre-assume some of those things and make sure that you're applying a workflow that makes sense. In this case, I ask the user a lot of questions because it's kind of interesting to show that. It gives you the ability to pick, various different clouds. Maybe you would be able to, predefine that. Maybe there's a particular latency requirement or cost requirement that you know. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and click on this. So what's happening on the back end here, obviously depending on how you would implement your own self-service portal, you can put all sorts of things in front of this, but the end result is making some API calls to RightScale. And I'll get into what it's doing on the back end. It's creating a new RightScale deployment. So I'm going to switch over to the RightScale dashboard here. I've got that up already. And show you the list of deployments. And in a moment here, it should actually have the one that we're creating, but it should show you the list of the ones that are already in this account. So a deployment in RightScale is one of these services, one of these applications, right? So you can think of it just like in traditional data center terms. It's the 4 or 5 or 400 or 500 servers that I have in a rack in a data center somewhere that is assigned to a particular application. And so this is a list of ones that we have in this particular account. We've got one that kind of groups together load testing servers that we have, a base deployment, one that shows cloud bursting and some other things here. If we refresh it, we should see the one that the IT vending machine is creating here in a minute, which I named IT Hero. So the deployment is important because it acts not only obviously as a visual tool for organizing these things, but we use it also to do a lot of the automation and a lot of the orchestration that we do within the application. So what I mean by that is when you're auto-scaling or you're adding new capacity or new servers or maybe even a new service to an application, it needs to know about the other things, the other services, the other nodes that are supporting that application. So we have actually pre-built deployments and pre-built config management that when you bring up a new application server in a 3-tier scaling web app, for instance, it'll actually discover the load balancers that are in the same deployment. And we do that by discovering it via a tag. And that application server will, once it's discovered those load balancers, actually make another API call that registers that new application server with its private IP address that's been dynamically assigned to each one of the load balancers that it finds. There'll be inputs on the deployment that actually show the specifics of the database connectivity, things of that nature. So here's our IT Hero deployment. And looks like we actually have it all up and running here. Not up and running, configured anyhow. The instances aren't yet running. So the other piece that is interesting, we talked about the ability to kind of do this repeatably. Of course, with an IT vending machine or with a self-service portal, you're going to give users the ability to kind of stamp these things out, and you'll have those things predefined. But there might be reusable components that you build internally. You know that almost everyone's going to need a load balancer. Almost everyone's going to need a certain service that you run for your particular application suite. But maybe there's minor changes that you need to make. Like, for instance, I'm going to collapse all these and show you some of the inputs that we can pass into our config management code. Maybe, in this case, it's a PHP application server, but all of your PHP app servers look the same aside from the application that they run, right? You can actually use the inputs here to define where you go and get the application code from. So we've specified we're going to go grab it from Git. This is the Git repository, and this is actually the branch or the revision that we're going to use. The template, which I'll touch on a little bit here in a second, is the same. You're still installing PHP, you're still installing Apache, you're still configuring it with certain settings for the number of processes and the amount of memory and all those sorts of things based on the instance type that it's running on. But just the application is different, right? You have those standards predefined. So since I've talked about the template, that concept, I'll dig into it a little bit. And for those of you, I saw some hands that write code. How many of you guys also do DevOps, do config management? Is there some of those, a lot of the same people? Okay. So this is going to be pretty familiar for you guys, right? What a server template is for us, it's a combination of the base underlying image. So we basically, RightScale produces a set of base images that are just the base operating system plus an agent that we install that we use for the orchestration that we do. And we make those available on all the clouds that we support, right? So you've seen some of the newer features that have come out from Amazon, the ability to copy images from one region to another. We do essentially that, but we actually create a different image and put it in every region. Also put it in different clouds that we support as well. So once we provision one of those, the next step, of course, is to configure it. And Rishi talked about, that falls under governance, that falls under the repeatability, right? It falls under those things that make sure that you're getting exactly what you ask for every time. Those of you in the room that have written config management code know exactly what I'm talking about here. We add a little bit of extra functionality to this, which is interesting. So for most of you that are using, Chef or Puppet or Salt, you set up a manifest or you set up a role in Chef that defines what the state of that server is going to be, what the actual configuration is going to be. Once that thing's up and running, it's not always clear how you would do things operationally with it. Or perhaps even more interestingly, when there's an event where you're terminating that, getting rid of that server, you might have to change the role on it or change some attributes about what gets passed in that config management code. So we actually break down our config management into three different types here. The boot sequence, which is going to be very analogous to what you're used to, right? This is the role, the initial configuration that you get for that server. Then there's operational scripts. So these are the things that you're going to do on a regular basis to one of these servers that's up and running. So Rishi pointed out some of the compliance things, right? And making sure that you do security updates on a regular basis. That's going to be an operational script. I'll actually expand this one. In this case, there's sort of a bunch of things attached to it. It's a PHP app server, so we're going to do security updates. We might grab a new version of our application code. So we might change that input that defines the branch that we're using. And we might update that and then rerun this particular script across one or many of our nodes. We might stop or start Apache, right? I like to refer to these as sort of like the level 1 support tasks. This is the stuff that normally you'd just SSH into a box or use some sort of tool to run an arbitrary command. Well, instead of doing that, you actually have that codified. It's there. It's part of the server template definition. You know that you're going to need to perform this sort of task on this sort of server on a regular basis. Makes it really, really easy to perform those tasks in a repeatable way. And then lastly, the decommission piece. So in an environment where you're adding capacity and removing capacity, right, taking advantage of that OpEx versus CapEx model, right? You need to be able to just as easily remove servers from a deployment and from a server, from an application or a service as easily as you add it. So that's what we do with the decommission sequence. So where I described that servers that come up can discover services in the deployment and sort of register themselves with those services. The same is true when we start to pull capacity out of a deployment, start to pull nodes out of that application. These scripts will run. In this case, this is an app server, so it removes itself from all the load balancers that it finds. And it closes up some IP tables firewall rules and makes sure that the database doesn't accept requests from this IP address or this node anymore. Cleans up after itself. So another thing that I wanted to touch on quickly here is the auditability, some of that governance capability, right? This is actually a list of all of the auditable tasks that have happened across all of the servers that are actually running in this particular RightScale account. Some of these happen automatically. RS User Policy Bot's another tool that I wrote that actually makes some changes to various user permissions. It's also the user that creates everything that the SelfService Portal that you saw uses. That's actually like a service account that it uses. But we can see all of the things that have happened over time to any one of these. We could drill down even and see specific things. We can see back here, looks like today's the 14th. Earlier today, a server was launched and we saw the config management code that ran and configured it. This was a database instance, so we can see some of that information there. So really granular visibility into what's happening. This is all exposed through an API as well, so you can capture those things there and see those as they're happening in real time. Another thing that gives you a lot of really great visibility is a fairly new feature that we've added called the network map here. So what I'm doing is switching over to our network manager, which is going to show all of the networks that you can manage. So what that means is the default network that you get in each one of the Amazon regions, as well as any VPCs that you set up. And should it load here, I'll be able to show you the really cool graph. I'm using the conference Wi-Fi, so I blame all of you tweeting out there for the slowness. We'll wait for that to come up. What I'm going to show you is, first it's going to show you a list of all of the networks. When we drill into that, you're going to see things like security groups that are set up for that particular network. And then the network map, which is what I really want to show you. It's actually going to show the flow of data from the public internet or from other security groups that are in that VPC or in that network, all the way to the instances that are actually members of those security groups. Really cool visualization, should it load. Demo gods are not with me today, apparently. There we go. So let's grab US East, because there's almost certainly something in there. So we can see, all of the data that you're used to seeing, the subnets, security groups. We also audit changes to this network and to each of the security groups. So if you add or remove rules, you'll see all of that in there as well. And then the really cool kind of fancy feature here of the network map. All right, so this is what this looks like, right? We've got over on the left here sort of all of the sources where the traffic's coming from. You can see the public internet. You can see the various security groups that we have. So we can then filter by that. So I want to see everything that's coming in through the public internet. Okay, that's cool. I see all of the various ports that I have open directly from the internet. But this seems strange. I've got 3306 open straight from the internet. That doesn't seem quite right. So if I filter by that, looks like I've got a path straight through from the internet on 3306 into these particular destination security groups. I'm actually in pretty good shape because it looks like there's actually not any servers running behind that. But how long would it take you to figure that out if you were just looking at the security group rules in the dashboard, or you were consuming that through the API, right? This is a really, really easy way for you to go through and visualize those things. These sorts of things are also exposed in reports and through our API as well. But this is a really quick way to get that sort of visibility into exactly what's going on from a security perspective. So adding that governance on top of it. So if you kind of take a step back and think about what we've shown you. We've shown you a self-service portal where end users really don't have to know any of this stuff, right? They don't need to know about what's secure and what's not. They don't need to know about what cloud is the right cloud to run it on. They don't need to know about the fact that you should have an N+1 architecture and you need to have a replicated database and all these things, right? They know that they need a service, right? And that's what you want to give them. You want to give them no touch, the ability to go in and request something and get it. You don't want to have to open that ticket and actually give them what they need, right? It makes it a lot easier to do that. But then you have the ability to go into the RightScale dashboard and see all of this, right? You have the visibility into exactly what they're doing. You have the ability to make changes for them on the fly as necessary, and you've designed all these things ahead of time. So the one last thing that I want to show you, and hopefully I'm not speeding through this too much, but we'll open it up for questions here in a minute as well, is that last piece of it. So once you've gone through and given users the ability to provision things, given yourself the ability to actually manage it and keep an eye on it and make sure that everything's working, maybe the next thing you're going to ask, or that your CFO is going to ask, is, well, how much is this costing me, right? So that's where cloud analytics here comes into play, and this is actually something that we released just last week, actually, so we're real excited about that. And this is going to give you that visibility of how much does it cost, right? So this is actually real usage data across the various accounts that we have. This is the top-level dashboard that shows you those things in aggregate. So unmanaged instances in various different deployments, what our distribution is across different instance types, across different clouds, the current accounts that I have access to and that I'm showing that data from. And then if I kind of open up the tab over here, I can actually be more specific. Maybe I want to know what all of my usage is in a particular RightScale account, or maybe for a particular application, or maybe even for a particular user. I can start filtering based on those things. I can say maybe I want to know everything about what's going on in this particular deployment and in this particular account, and start setting filters. So you can really drill down into this really quickly, right? The same sort of visibility that you saw with the network manager, like if you imagine you're doing a reserved instance buy, and you want to figure out exactly how many of a certain instance type you're running and in the various different availability zones and regions, that can be really hard to suss out, right? Writing a big spreadsheet and putting all that information in there. This gives you the ability to very, very, very quickly get that. We actually went through that exercise before we had this tool and while we were sort of building it.
Yeah, in fact, the first approach was, hey, it's a spreadsheet. How hard can it be? There's a few instance types, a few price points, and let's build it out and see what it looks like. And pretty quickly, the moment prices changed, or we had to add a new instance type, then you get into that spreadsheet maintenance mode, which is a nightmare. So this gives you the ability to slice and dice it across a variety of tags and attributes, and drill into exactly where your spend is happening and why it's happening.
And of course, all this data ends up being available to you as raw aggregate data as well. So we'll spit this out into a spreadsheet or into a CSV file for you, so that once you've filtered all that down, you can have that raw data and slice and dice it, give it to your BI data nerds, and let them do their magic with it as well. So I encourage you guys actually to go down to our booth, where we're right in the front there. Talk to Hassan. He's actually the co-founder of the company that RightScale acquired that actually built this product, and he'll give you a real good demo on it and kind of understand how you can use it within your organization as well. So that's actually what I had in terms of what we wanted to demo you.
Maybe the scenario builder?
Scenario builder, I don't have access to it. Hassan does. So that's your motivation for going down to the booth and having him show you that. It's one of the newer features that's available in Cloud Analytics, is the ability to not only see what you've done historically, but to also build scenarios of what's happening and what you predict to happen in the future. So you know that you're going to have a spike in traffic around Christmas because you're an online retailer, or you know that you've kind of had this steady growth of adding developers, and you need to have their machines come online and run them for certain periods of time during the day. You can actually predict that. You can set up patterns for that. And get an idea of what these sorts of things are going to cost you, long term, and by applying those patterns. So go down to the booth and check that out as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely more than happy to show you a demo of that capability. It's pretty cool. It kind of it starts where you left off with your historical spend, and then from there draws a line that you can change costs and instance sizes and whatnot, and make really good decisions about how you're spending money in the cloud.